We need to talk about scrap. One of the longest running problems for any woodworker is what to do with your scrap, but more importantly, what defines something that you should keep as scrap. There's so many different ways to decide what to keep. I want to share with you some of the ones I've thought through over the years, as well as my personal list of what I choose to keep and why I choose to keep it. Let's start with some of the general things you should consider about keeping scrap. These aren't necessarily all the things I consider. I will touch on specifically what I do though in a second. Now the first thing to consider is, do you have any tools that have minimum kind of length requirements, specifically the planer and the jointer? For my planer, 10.5, 10 inches is kind of what I consider the minimum. The area between where the two rollers connect so that it's never free floating, 10 inches is kind of where I feel safe. So anything over 10 inches, that's a keep for me. I can plane it down, I can use it for a variety of things because I can change thickness, totally a keep. Number two is, do you have a project that you know you will be doing soon and this piece will likely be useful there, even if you have to buy other lumber anyways? If you're building something out of walnut and you've got some existing walnut pieces that, aren't microscopic, it's never a bad idea to keep them until you're done with that project. You never know if you're going to need a piece that's matching in color. One of the hardest things to do is find wood, even within the same species, that's the right color. This walnut varies a lot. So having a reddish hue piece will help me if I know I'm coming up with a project that's going to have a reddish hue when I order the lumber. So if you know you have a project coming up and it's something related to the color of the wood perhaps, you can save that. That would be considered scrap that you can save until at least after that project. Up next, we have recurring builds. So perhaps you make something and you sell it and you make a lot of the same thing, and there's something within that project that can be made out of a small piece of wood. There's something I make that requires a lot of 3 5/8 inches long pieces of a variety of thicknesses to connect two things together. I have a whole box of things about this size. As long as it's 3 5/8 that I can get out of it, I keep it mainly for the matching wood or to provide some contrasting colors in the future. For most people, this is scrap, but because I have a recurring thing I make and I know I will need dimensions very specifically, I keep pieces this size. I can't run it through the planer, so it has to stay here, but I know I'm going to use it. Up next, we have a project that requires a collection of scraps that you will eventually build, specifically cutting boards. That's a really common one, right? You often want a lot of longer strips, maybe a variety of woods, maybe all the same wood. Anyone can build a cutting board at any time. If you have any interest in that, then you can feel free to keep scraps that are of a certain length that will go well with a cutting board that you can do the glue up. There's no reason to throw something away that can be made into something pretty obvious and pretty simple to do, even if you don't get to it for a while. It's great to have longer scraps on hand that could be made into a cutting board for an emergency gift or something like that. So I consider scraps that could go into a cutting board or could be a birdhouse, some kind of gift, quick project that I need to make in the future to be worth saving. Some people will save wood purely based on value. This is some Indian rosewood, East Indian rosewood. Smells amazing. I obviously have a need for this at 3 5/8 inches long, but there are some people who keep any wood that is valuable, parts of ebony, something like that. They just can't get rid of it, and I totally understand. If you spend a lot of money on a board and you've got some scraps left over, it just feels like you're throwing money away. So a lot of people keep scraps due to the value of the lumber. I don't think it's the best reason, but don't feel bad if you just can't part with something very expensive. After that, we just simply have to think about space. If you have a ton of space, you can store more scrap. You don't have to make that decision at the time, and maybe once a year you do a clean out. I clean out once a year. I've got enough space that I keep a lot more than I will probably use, but every summer I empty out every bin and I go through and see what fits my personal criteria still. If I haven't used something in over a year, I'm probably never going to use it. So if you have barely any space, you need to be much more decisive about your decisions. If you have a ton of space, it's okay to save more than you'll probably need as long as you go through it at some time, maybe once a year, and get rid of what you haven't used over that prior year or what doesn't fit into any of the other criteria. Up next, we have shop project or kind of outdoor project assistance pieces. I really like making my push sticks out of slightly thicker wood, and construction lumber is a perfect thickness for that. So anything that I know I can get a push stick or push block more specifically out of, I go ahead and keep that. These may seem like odd ones, but every year somebody around me cuts down a big tree, and if it's on the side of the road, I always grab a couple pieces, maybe just 3 feet long, something like that, and I mill it myself. I do it in my backyard with a chainsaw free-handed, and these have been around for probably 3 years because I use them to hold the wood down while I'm freehand chainsawing. Very odd ones to keep, but again, this is an outdoor project. I have a use for it. I have no problem keeping stuff like that. If it's something you can just use over and over outdoors, something you can get dirty, whatever. Totally worth keeping in that case. I'm the kind of person who likes to do setup cuts. I like to do all kinds of testing and fits before actually getting into my nice wood. And a lot of my kind of man-made material, plywood, MDF, fiberboard, is saved specifically for that. If I'm cutting like a groove or a dado, I can sneak up on it using these first, and then I can actually do it on my piece so I know that it matches. So it helps to have something of a similar material perhaps to what I'm using, or something larger in thickness. Setup cuts, totally a valid reason to keep scrap. It's always good to be able to dial in that measurement before you go and cut through walnut, cherry, whatever it is that's expensive. I think you absolutely should keep around some setup-based scrap. And the last two reasons that a lot of people keep scrap don't really apply to me are firewood. You're gonna burn it, whether it's just a fire in your backyard, campfire somewhere, heat your house, I guess, and just indecision. You just can't decide in the moment. It's a choice you just don't want to make right then, and you don't have to make it right then. We'd like to get through that by going through our list here and deciding which of these apply, but I get it. Sometimes you just don't know whether you want to get rid of something or not right in that moment. Those are what I would consider the general categories of what to keep, though I want to add my categories now specifically. Some of these will overlap. Dimension, again, that's for me automatically. If I can run it through my planer and jointer, I keep it no matter what, because it's something I can manipulate into a lot of different things through thickness and size. If you come into my shop, you'll see a lot of pieces that are over 19 inches long and 3/8 of an inch thick. And I use these specifically for adding bracing on packaging, for packaging very expensive pieces. I just create miniature little kind of frame along the bottom, little chop with the bandsaw to fit it in there. It provides some extra assurance. I've had things go to Australia that have survived based on creating a small little kind of extra reinforcement frame in the box. So I keep a ton of 3/8 inch thick, 16 to 19 inch long pieces of scrap. For most people, these probably wouldn't be useful at all unless you're doing the cutting boards, but for me, these are invaluable. As I said before, for recurring projects, I always keep around these small pieces, but I also like to have small pieces for testing kind of handle designs, knob pull designs, aesthetic designs. I can take it right over to my bandsaw or table saw or whatever and cut out small little kind of just trial and errors on handles, knobs, stuff like that. I make an oddly large amount of things that require little handles. So these are absolutely great for me. And hey, if the piece I'm using, I don't want to cut out more from it, and I have something that matches, even better. And I can just go ahead and make the handle, the permanent handle, directly out of a small piece of scrap. One that applies to me very specifically, but probably not to a lot of other people, is I make something and sell something that requires a lot of dowels that are also seen externally. So I need a ton of very thin pieces of lumber of a variety of colors, often to match something that I've bought, and maybe I don't have enough in it to get out longer pieces to make dowels. So I have quite an extensive collection, and this isn't all of it, of dowel wood, variety of walnut, cherry, maple, rosewood, mahogany, the oaks and ashes, and then other exotic woods in case I ever need it. So for me, this is a very specific one, but you'll notice I have an entire container devoted to dowel-sized pieces. Now, depending upon when you visit my shop, you may see piles or absolutely no foot-long, half-inch by half-inch pieces of wood. I use these to stack and sticker lumber when I get it. If I've just bought a bunch of lumber, they're all going to be in use. If I'm near the bottom of my pile, there's going to be a bunch of them laying around. Most people would walk in and say, why on earth are you keeping all of these? Well, it's mainly because I used to throw them out, and then I got very annoyed at continuously having to cut more stickers every single time I would get lumber. So I just said, I'm just going to keep all of these. And sometimes it will be in a big weird looking pile. Other times they'll all be used stacking boards. As I said before, I'm big on setup cuts. So I keep around a lot of kind of worthless material because I can just cut into it. I'm not a big value person. If I have a chunk of ebony and I really have no other use for it, even one that I just can't even imagine, I have no problem getting rid of it. It's going to take up space. I understand it's expensive, but I'm not somebody who holds on to something purely because I paid a lot of money for the original board. I'm obviously not throwing away the original board. And there have been times in the past where I know someone who turns. If there's something long enough to turn that I'm not going to use, I'll give it to them. And I think that's a great thing too. If you know any wood turners, a lot of times they can use pieces that would otherwise not be usable for you, pens, stuff like that. So I wouldn't suggest keeping something purely based on value, but I think it's okay. And I think it's absolutely okay if you know someone who can use smaller, kind of squared off stock pieces of valuable lumber. The final reason I keep a variety of hardwoods is to test stain and die. Now I know for a lot of people that's just a big no-no, but I really like to do it on certain projects where I want a certain aesthetic. And I don't have an issue staining maple or dyeing maple more specifically, but I usually want to know ahead of time exactly what it looks like, and I may have 5 or 6 different options. I love having scraps around so that I don't have to cut a piece off the board. I want to save that board because it's all in place for the project. I can just test it on something that looks quite similar. I'll know right then and there what exactly stain choice or dye choice I want to use. That's going to do it for today. If you have any other reasons that you keep scrap, or if you think some of these are not very good reasons, let me know. And best of luck trying to get rid of some of your scrap. Seriously, once every summer, go through it all. If you haven't used it in the last year and you are not 100% convinced you're going to use it, pitch it. You're going to end up with more scrap over the course of the next year. You don't need to keep stuff that you haven't used in an entire year. All right, bye. Have a good one.